Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
On the 22nd of August 1968, that's a touch under 53 years ago, number 247 baggy green cap was handed out to a bloke who wanted to play 38 test matches, 9 one-day internationals for Australia, and if he had to bowl 10 more balls in test cricket, he would have bowled 10,000 deliveries in test cricket. Rob Cameron, who have we got on the telephone?
Delighted to introduce a man who moulded my very ordinary cricket career as a budding teenage off-spinner. The great delight I had in watching Ashley Mallett ply his craft, an even greater delight to talk to him this morning. Ashley Mallett, good morning and welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show.
Thanks, Rob and Neil. Good to be with you.
No, it's fantastic to have you on, and we'll deal with the major purpose of having you on, and we might digress a bit from that. But after finishing your career, you have been the author of many wonderful cricket books, and the newest one is on the shelves now and would make great reading, a book called The Last Invincible, because that's exactly the situation we have with the much talked about 1948 Australian touring team, and only Neil Harvey remains, and you've taken the opportunity to highlight him in the book, which is very good. Just tell us how the idea started.
Well, I actually started off thinking about the playing of spin bowling these days, and it's pretty ordinary. I mean, there's a stand and deliver type attitude where probably from the T20s. So even in Test cricket, you have the men clustered around the bat or on the boundary. So it's either block or slog. There's no sort of getting down the track or pushing for twos and ones in the time-honoured way, and the way that Harvey did. And anyway, my publisher wasn't all that keen on that idea, but she was keen on going for the Neil Harvey story, which is a terrific story.
It is indeed the youngest member of that 1948 touring team, and I had the privilege of being at a function that the late Sam Loxton spoke at, and he remembered that Neil Harvey had to go to the Fitzroy Cricket Club where he was playing at the time to borrow a bat to take on that tour of England, how things have changed in that world, but made 100 on that tour as a 19-year-old, I believe, and did turn out, you had the privilege of seeing him, but did turn out to be one of the all-time great Australian players.
Absolutely, and he was struggling early on that tour, averaging about 7, probably didn't come to terms with the wickets, and he wanted some advice from Bradman, but he sort of was a bit hesitant because, Bradman was the father figure, 20 years older than Neil. So he said to Sam, who was his roommate, Sam Loxton, he said, Sam, could you go and ask the boss what I'm doing wrong? I said, yeah. So Sam talked to Bradman and came back with a message. If you don't hit the ball in the air, you can't get out. And that's the only advice he got for the whole tour. He said, it was pretty good. It's pretty sensible. When I keep the ball on the ground, I can't get out. I can't get caught.
Well, the problem was, actually, he probably borrowed a right-hander's bat. That might have been the issue. He had the mistake of standing on the wrong side of it. Maybe he should have told him to turn around.
Well, it's interesting. When he played his first Test match at Leeds, he had they gave out 2 Sykes bats, and he used one in all the county games, and then he saved one up and he played in the Test. He got the 100. And he never used that bat again because he signed up with Stuart Surridge. So that bat that he got the 100 with at Leeds, 112, the famous match where, Bradman and Morris got the runs on the last day, it was only used once, and he got 100 with it.
Because I think that the whole thing, that there's this mystique about the Invincibles. For younger folk listening, and I am one of the younger folk, actually, I must point out I'm significantly younger than Rob, you understand. Well, a few years anyway. And I don't think people understand these days that there was, 15, 20 games or something that he would have had lead-up games to get used to the conditions, unlike now where you sort of get off an aeroplane and run off and play the first Test?
Well, they always played, 13 and 14 games before the first Test. There was about, I think they played 30 undefeated in 34 matches. There was one game against Somerset, and it was around about the time of Wimbledon, and the players wanted to get the game over with and get down to Wimbledon and watch the final. I think Bromwich was playing some bloke from the US, could be Vic Seixas or someone. Anyway, all the players wanted to get to the ground, and Australia had to get about 140 to win the game. And Bradman said to Sam and Neil, "You blokes better open the batting and get the runs. Most of us are going down to Wimbledon." Well, it wasn't most of them; it was all of them. They all went to Wimbledon. So Australia had to get 140 to win, and if either Sam or Neil got out, they would have lost on a forfeit. Now, you know, you're talking about Bradman being all-encompassing about his mind about going through the tour undefeated, and then they had that situation. Anyway, they got the runs, no problem. Got the runs about an hour, had a shower, got dressed, and then they were looking around for the cars to get down to the Wimbledon, and they'd all gone. All the blokes had gone. There was no one there at all, so they had to get a tube to the ground, and they arrived at the ground, and one of the blokes, who was it, the leg spinner from the Victorian leg spinner, I'm just trying to think of his name.
Ron Hammonds?
No, Doug Ring.
Doug Ring, yes, of course.
So Doug Ring was sort of sitting there, and they sidled up and sat down next to him, and Doug said to Sam, "Did we win?" I mean, you know, that would have been a forfeit if either of them had got out. So, interesting aside to that particular tour, yeah.
Now, fast forward to my ordinary career, country cricket. I know that after a game or at a practice session, there'd be a group of blokes standing around. If one was struggling, he'd say, "Hey guys, I'm having a bit of trouble. Can you help me out a bit?" Certainly have no trouble talking to the captain. I would imagine that would be similar in your time in an Australian dressing room with Ian Chappell and a very blokey, matey environment, but I just can't get my head around why a member of a touring team would not have the confidence to go and speak to his captain about such an important matter. Different times indeed.
Yeah, but I mean, he was 19 years old, and the next oldest bloke was Sam, and another fellow around about 26. So that's a 7-year difference. Most of the guys had been to war, the heroes of the war, such as Keith Miller and Ray Linville and these fellows, and Lindsay Hazzard. So cricket to them was just a joy. It was just a fun thing, basically, and they didn't take it too seriously, but they were just so good, you know. Keith Miller was a fantastic player, as was Arthur Morris and Ray Linville, and, well, just about the whole side. So, you know, you can imagine Neil at 19, Bradman's 40, a bit like a 14, 15-year-old kid going to Dad and asking an important question. A little bit reticent to do it, and I guess that's what it was.
Yeah, it was certainly very different times indeed. Just on that Australian team, you mentioned they were great players, and they did definitely turn out to be, but I guess from the ravages of the war, England took a fair bit longer to get organised. So as good as Australia were result-wise, were they helped a bit by England being so far behind the quality test team that they would normally put out because of the war?
Well, and if you have a look at the names, the quality was there, but of course they'd been through hell, you know, through the Blitz and the Battle of Britain and all that sort of stuff. And there were still food shortages in England in 1948, right into the 50s. The food shortages were there. I mean, you know, very difficult to get eggs and all that sort of stuff. So they wouldn't have had the decent food that the Australians would have experienced, and I think the Australian team brought over a whole lot of food packages and gave them out. So they were aware of, you know, England's plight, and I guess they wouldn't have had the nourishment. I mean, some of those players might have been, you know, struggling physically, I would think.
Yeah, really
charity and support finished the minute they walked onto the ground.
Yeah, that's right. Just fast forwarding to your career, and let's put the similar context. Ian Chappell had a sort of an aura around him, but I would imagine that you were a bit younger than him, obviously, but when you came into the side, he was still one of the younger players under Bill Laurie's tutelage, so I guess you were shoulder to shoulder. So when he became captain, did that make it a lot easier for you to conduct conversations and learn from and share ideas with your captain in your era?
Well, for a start, he gave him a bowl, whereas Laurie didn't. And I remember one time in Queensland, I had 4 overs and 3 spells. It was a bit difficult to get wickets when that sort of stuff's going on. Actually, Ian never sort of talked to you about how to bowl or anything like that, but he empowered his players, and he gave you the confidence from me. He thought, well, okay, you're in the side, you're good enough to play, and what sort of field do you want? And if you could sort of talk about field placing. Now with Bill, you never talked to him about field placing. So I remember I was bowling one day to Rowan Canai. This was a test match in Brisbane, and Rowan went from 92 to 96. He drop kicked me over mid-on for 4 to go to 96. And I said to Bill, geez, I said, put Johnny Gleeson back. I said, he's gonna go again, you know. We'll get him here. You sort of sensed that he was going to go. And Bill said, good God, no, he's on 96. I said, mate, his name is Rowan Canai, not Bill Laurie. Put him back. And anyway, he wouldn't put him back. And I said to Johnny Gleeson, I said, no, mate, just I'm going to do up my shoelace. You go back as fast as you can. Well, Johnny, I reckon he must have been 40 then. And he was struggling in the field, but he went back. He got to about 3/4 of the way back to the boundary. Rowan went again and hit it straight down his throat. He was out for 96. Bill came up and said, what a good field placing that was. So he had a good sense of humour. I mean, Bill was a wonderful player, but as a captain he was pretty negative, and that's why they brought in Chappell, I suppose, because he was an attacking captain. He always tried to go for a win, and he sometimes gave the opposition a chance to win for Australia to have a chance to win. And so it was really good cricket.
You're South Australian... Oh, sorry, Neil, go.
No, and I noticed, the whole thing about only bowling in very short spells. In your first test, you obviously decided, we'll fix that by taking a wicket with your 5th ball, just in case he took you off.
Well, I appealed for the first 4 balls, given not out. And I think the umpire was so annoyed that he gave the 5th one out. Actually, interesting.
A chap called Colin Cowdrey who could play a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the first game I ever saw was the last test. My grandfather took me to the SCG. I was born in Sydney, and we were right in front of the Nobles stand behind the picket, right on the pickets. And a bloke fielding. This is when Harvey got 92 not out. Tyson bowled Australia out with 6 wickets. Tyson bowling from the Paddington end with on a green top with a wind behind him. I mean, he was quick, and Harvey belting hell out of him. Hooks, cuts, drive, everything, and up the other end they just felt like 9-pins. But anyway, right on the boundary was this rather plump Englishman, 23 years old, Colin Cowdrey. So funny how things worked out that he became a first test wicket about 14 years later, I suppose.
Indeed. That era, you spoke about fast bowlers, and we read about Larwood and Spofford even, and Tyson, and try and get a gauge on how quick they actually were when radar guns weren't invented. But you watched a lot, you've played a lot, you've watched a lot since. But really, on a good day when he was really firing, I don't think I've ever seen anyone bowl faster than Jeff Thomson. Was he as quick as you'd seen? Yeah,
he's the quickest, and you talk about ray guns and all this sort of stuff. I mean, he would have, at his top, 74.5, he was bowling about 170 Ks. And I've on 3 different occasions I've seen the ball go over Marshy's head and hit the side screen right at the bottom on the full. That happened in Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, I think.
Yeah.
But and Melbourne and Perth and Sydney, I mean, on the straight hit is not a huge distance. It's not like Adelaide Oval, but it's still a fair carry, isn't it?
Yeah, I think my first visits to the MCG, I was stunned as to how far back Marsh stood, and then how far behind him Ian Chappell stood at first slip, to get some gauge of the pace of the ball. Now, you spent a lot of time in the gully in that period of time, and the ball seems to get there quicker because of angles and all sorts of things, but you're able to take some extraordinary catches for someone who allegedly would fall over a kit bag at the drop of a hat. Did you enjoy fielding in the gully to Thompson and Lilly?
Loved it. The thing is fielding in the gully, you've got to get your timing right, and I always tried to get as close as possible to the bat. So that cuts down the angle. So the further back you are, the angle gets wider and wider. I mean, you had to look at Steve Waugh and some of those blokes, Jeff Marsh. I mean, they were so far back you could run too. You know, so you had to be close to the wicket. That was the first thing. The second thing was that you had to have the timing right, so when you expected the ball to come. So with Lilly, I could watch him actually release the ball. So he'd release the ball and my eyes would go straight to the edge of the bat. And that gave you a really good idea of if it's going to come at, around about this time. But with Tomo, he was so fast, you had to just watch him as he loaded up. So he'd load up to bowl, then you go to the edge of the bat. But I saw the ball pretty clearly, and I had good reflexes. I played baseball as a catcher and that sort of thing, and a lot of the catches I took were actually left-handed, and the baseball glove was
okay. Yeah. Instinctively going with that. We can't have a chat with you about that era and not speak to a man who is still very much the patriarch of Geelong cricket, your former teammate Ian Redpath, who, similarly to you, was not an elegant-looking chap wandering around a cricket ground. He certainly was with a bat, and he certainly, like you, was an extraordinary catcher in that wide slip or gully region. But as a teammate and character, you were probably deemed to be most alike for we viewers of the game. How did you two get on in the dressing room?
Oh, Red is a lovely bloke. He hasn't changed at all. I think he's still got the same coat he bought in England in 1964. I think he's still wearing it, one of these herringbone things. But I reckon he's at home when he's fishing the sunrise with his deer stalker on, and he loves fishing. He's a pretty good painter too. He paints and watercolours. Keeps himself fit, plays golf. Lovely man.
Do you characters catch up a bit reunion wise, or just occasionally a phone call, or you stumble over each other at a function? How does it work out connection with this? Well, what I thought was the best era of Australian cricket, that sort of 70s period. Yeah,
look, I catch up with those, the Chappells and so forth, because they get around, certainly Ian gets around the media and that sort of thing, but of course with this pandemic, it's a bit hard to catch up with anyone, anywhere. But before the pandemic, I guess, I would catch up with fellas from time to time, Lilly or Marsh or Inver if they're in Adelaide, because Marshy lives in Adelaide now. I always keep in touch with Inver and Ross Edwards, Ian Chappell, Dougie Walters, not so much, but sometimes on the phone, Brian Tabor on the phone. In doing this book, I caught up with a lot of people that I knew and played with, Doggy Main and so forth, and some that I hadn't met and hadn't had a lot of time with, and so that was terrific for me. And doing the book was pretty much a labour of love. I mean, Neil Harvey, whom I saw, as I said, in 1954, first up, but about 20 years ago I got to know him, and I used to go to New Zealand with Harv and his partner in crime, Alan Davidson, and I got to know him really well and became mates, and we are mates. Albeit he's 17 years older, it doesn't matter.
Ashley, as an author, what part do you enjoy most? Is it actually putting the words together, or the research? Because being a cricket person, I imagine that the research involves a lot of enlightening conversation.
Oh, a bit of both. I mean, I enjoy the research. I mean, you've got to research some areas and so forth, but actually writing is the actual process is the best part. And often when you finish a book, and I often just can't read it again because I've already had so much to do with each particular bit of it. I'm just looking for the next project.
Interesting to put a book like this on the market at this time. Actually, the cricket purists seem to be the younger ones drifting away from Test cricket into the shorter format. But hopefully there's still enough Australians who are attached to the great Test match cricket that will make this an enlightening read for them.
Yeah, no, well, I hope so, and I think, that's part of the research thing, the education process of young people. I mean, you've got to understand the past to have any idea of forging the future, really. And I think in my day we used to read a lot of the old players and that sort of thing. I mean, there was no television, wasn't much stuff on radio about the old players, but I read hell of a lot of old cricket books and so forth, which really fired my enthusiasm for the game. It's interesting because there's not enough footage of these old players that the young people can read about it, but don't think, oh, I haven't seen this bloke play, So it's a little bit sad in a way because a lot of the footage, even as earlier goes the 70s, was sort of scrapped, so the TV station would, wipe whatever happened the day before and then record the next lot. I mean, when Dougie Walters got 100 against the Poms, 74-5 in Perth, they wiped the tape. He got 100 in the session. It was a magnificent innings.
Our radio station wipes the tape when we're on. So I can't understand why. I'm actually looking at I got a bookshop just near where I'm broadcasting from, and my first ever cricket book is sitting up there. It was by a bloke called Bob Simpson who could play a bit, and it was an introduction to cricket to me because I was only 6 at the time. But the book is called The Australians in England, 1968, and I've got to say that's the first time I'd ever heard of you, and it's sitting up there on my shelf still. So it does have an impact on young people even back in those days. Yeah,
and I got a big rap for my 43 not out in my first innings.
Absolutely.
Went all downhill.
Yeah,
I pumped your tyres up a bit too far, Ash. I suggested you probably got a half century in Test cricket or two. I was disappointed to find that 43 was as close as you got, but you did manage a few first-class ones, I imagine. So you describe yourself as a handy lower-order bat?
Well, actually, I got 28 wickets against India in 1969-70 in the 5 Tests, and then I got 6 wickets in the first Test against South Africa. So I was going all right, and then I got dropped for the rest of the series. And I said to Bill Laurie, I said, if you got 300s in a row, which I got 3 fifers in a row, would you drop yourself? He said, no. I said, well, you've dropped me. Same thing. And so I was never going to play again on that tour. And I said to Ian Temple, then vice captain, I said, now, Chappelli, how do I get back in this bloody Australian side? I mean, I'm bowling okay. And he said, you got to get some runs. So I said, well, give us a lift in the order. So anyway, we get me playing WA on Adelaide Oval, and I'm lifted to number 7. And I get 92. And this is pretty good attack. I mean, I had Lilly, Mackenzie, Locke, Inverarity, Man, so it was a test attack, basically. And I played pretty well. And I had a slog against Lockie and got out for 92, and I said, threw my bat down, so I'll never play a shot like that at 92 again, and I never did. But the next game was...
If only Shane Warne had have heard that at 99.
MCG, Victoria, I got 76, and I think I was Froggy Thompson's 100th first-class victim, caught by Slug Jordan behind, trying the hook. But that
Slug wouldn't have mentioned anything, would he?
The 250s I got in Shield cricket. Yeah.
Well, that certainly helped you. You and Max Walker and Dennis Lilly, and probably to a lesser degree Tomo, got a lot of lower order runs for Australia, and that had a lot to do with winning Test matches. So that practice, that perfect practice, Ashley, was very, very good to go with some bloody fine off-spin bowling. And it has been a pleasure to talk to you, a bit of a childhood hero. Great to speak to you. Best of luck with the book. It is a great thing that you people do, is continue to talk about the past in our cricket world, and the Invincibles will remain forever one of the greatest Australian teams, and Neil Harvey part of it. It's good that you're remembering. So get out to the bookshops and get yourself a copy, everyone. This will be a ripper.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Neil.
All the very
no
best.
Worries, Ashley. And of course, 3 weeks from now is Father's Day. Hint, hint, hint.
Yeah, good idea. Good on you, mate. All
Thanks,
the very
Ashley.
best. Good luck with your writing career now, and thank you for your cricket career.
Thank you. Thanks, fellas.
Ashley Mallett, former Australian off-spin bowler, and a mighty damn fine one at that, Neil Butler. Moderately good batsman and mighty fine gully fieldsman, and I think the GOAT has probably gone past him now as Australia's most productive off-spin bowler, but this bloke was very good, because he actually used to bowl like a proper spinner. He'd throw the ball up above their eyes, unlike Nathan Lyon, who bowls medium pace, but that's just me being an old off-spinner, old grumpy off-spinner.